I started some seeds indoors, and now the plants are ready to be transplanted into bigger pots. So join me today as I show you how I transplant my seedlings. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and each year I start hundreds of plants indoors from seed, and all of them at one point need to be transplanted, either directly into the garden or most likely into a bigger pot as they stay indoors and get bigger. The pot really doesn't matter. You can use the recycled containers you might get from a nursery or a home center when you buy plants. Today I'm going to reuse some yogurt cups, and all of these flowers that are going into my landscape for now will be going into yogurt cups first. I'm using a potting soil that is my own blend. It's 2 parts peat moss, 2 parts compost, 1 part perlite, and about half to 1 part of worm castings. And then I put a couple scoops of Osmocote. That's my recipe. You can easily buy a potting soil, but the key difference here from where the pots are now to where they're going is the soil. I've been growing these plants in these peat pellets, and I'll show you both how to transplant peat pellets and plants that are growing in a seed starter soil in a 72 cell tray. This material, the peat in both the seed starter mix and in these peat pellets, has virtually no nutrition. And so we need to get these plants from a low or no nutrition environment into an environment where we have a potting soil that has those organic materials like the compost and the worm castings and nutrients that come from the fertilizers like Osmocote. So that's what I'll be doing today. The number one question that I get when it comes to transplanting seedlings is about the timing, when to transplant the seedlings. And the first part of that is when the plants show their true leaves. And so as I look at these plants, I can see that they have developed their true leaves. And here's what I'm looking for. On these pansies, these are the cotyledon leaves right here. And then you can see the shape is different. These are the first true leaves, and they're shaped like a pansy leaf. On these violas, it's very similar. You can see that the true leaves have the distinctive shape of the viola, whereas the original leaves underneath, the cotyledon leaves, are basically just round. For a leaf like these over here on the calendula, you'll see the cotyledon leaves are rounded tips, but the true leaves that start growing out from the middle have the shape of the calendula. They're a little sharper edged and pointier. And for these yarrow, these have actually progressed past the first true leaves, but it's the same idea. When you look at the base of the plant, you'll see the cotyledon leaves are very round shaped at the base, but the true leaves have the shape of the final leaf of a yarrow. A second consideration for when to transplant your seedlings is when you see roots growing outside whatever container you're using, whether it's a small pot, a peat pellet, or a 72 cell tray. When you see the roots growing outside this seed starter soil, it's time to put them into potting soil. And the third thing I use for deciding when to transplant, I'll show you with some of the peppers I have. If you have the time, even before they develop their first set of true leaves, well, then I think that's time to do it. It's better to go ahead and transplant when you have the time than to wait too long and allow the plants to suffer by staying in a no nutrition environment. I also have my seed sowing plan using the grid system that I've shown in earlier videos. Some plant tags, because this is very important. It doesn't make much sense to know what they are while they're growing in the tray, and then we put them into a pot and we don't know what they are from that point forward. Use a plant tag to mark them. And then some type of tool, because while the peat pellets are really easy to pull out and pop into a pot, when you're starting with a container like the cells, you'll need something to pry them out. Now, you might have one of those cell systems where you can poke a finger through from the bottom because there's a hole in the cell, but the type I use have a closed bottom with just a little bit of drainage. So I like to use a tongue depressor. This is ideal for getting in and removing those plants, and I'll show you that here in just a little bit. Any type of tool that is wide and flat tends to work best. At the Galileo School Garden, I would use spoons for the students to get the plants out. We would use the handle of the spoon to pry out the plant, and then students could actually use the bowl of the spoon to carry it into the spot where they're putting it into another container. It's totally up to you. You don't really need to buy a special tool, just something that you like to use, and I like to use the tongue depressors. I'm often asked why I don't just start the seeds in the yogurt cup to begin. Well, you can see that demonstrated quite well here. I have 2 rows of calendula, and of the 12 seeds that I sowed, only these 3 plants germinated. And none of the rudbeckia right next door germinated. So if I had taken 72 little pots or yogurt cups to start my seeds, that would have taken an awful lot of space to find out that a bunch of them didn't germinate. I do have a lot of lights, but I don't have that much space right off the bat. So the big reason why I start in the peat pellets or in a flat with the cells is because not everything germinates, and they germinate at different times. So this allows me the opportunity to go ahead and transplant these seedlings that are ready and leave the rest behind underneath some of my lights to continue the germination process. Let's go ahead and begin. I like to start with about half of the container filled, and I've gone ahead and done that with all these others. I just take some of the potting soil and fill it about half full. Then it's extremely easy with these peat pellets. I can just pull it out, and you can see the roots have already started growing outside this container. Then I just put it in and then add some more soil around it. I'll press the soil into the open space between the peat pellet and the side of the container. And this one is all ready to go. Now I can move on to the second. The process is just as easy and just as fast. You take a half-filled container, you take your plant, stick it in, surround it with some more soil, press that soil into the empty space, because as those roots grow, you want them to be growing into the potting mix and not into air. Take the next container, take your plant, set it in, press it all down, and in very little time, I've got 3 calendula all ready to go. A problem that's a bit unique to the peat pellet method of growing is that occasionally a seed will have fallen outside the container and will actually have rooted from outside rather than inside. No problem. We just go ahead and take our yogurt cup, and in this case I'm going to go ahead and pull apart this mesh and put the plant in and then fill the soil around it. I achieved the same result, but I haven't had to use the whole pellet to get this one planted. And so now I actually have 4 calendula. The next step is to go ahead and make some plant tags. So I've got my tag, I have my garden marker, and now I'll go ahead and identify what it is I'm growing. And so these flowers are marked, and now I know what they are from this point until the point that they go into my landscape. A big reason why I like peat pellets is because of the speed with which I can transplant these seedlings. If you don't have as many, you might want to do it a little differently. This mesh that is used to wrap the peat pellets is said to be biodegradable, but I find if it does degrade, it takes a long time. So I often am pulling it off of the roots at the end of the season. So at this point, as you transplant the remaining seedlings, you can go ahead and just pull off this mesh, and the peat pellet should stay intact. Now you can put it into your container, fill the container with the additional potting soil, and you don't have to worry about that mesh remaining in your garden. And so that's what I'll do with the rest of these plants, is finish this tray, and then I'll get back with you here in just a moment. As I finish this tray, I'm faced with a bit of a dilemma that you might have to face as well. Some of these pellets have multiple plants growing in them. So I can do a couple things. One is to go ahead and put the entire pellet into the container, the yogurt cup in this case, and then come back later to thin out these plants, because this is pretty simple and the seedlings should do pretty well, but it is stressful whenever we move a plant from one container into another. The other option we have is to go ahead and split the pellet and break it apart into multiple plants and put these different plants into different containers. And so I'll go ahead and pull the mesh off of this pellet, and you can see there's multiple plants growing here. So I'll come in and just try to pull the pellet apart, and I'll go ahead and leave 4 in this case and 3 in this case, and then I'll put them in the container just as I was doing before, being careful to spread the soil around these plants. And now I have still multiple plants growing in each of these yogurt cups, but I have fewer plants that I'll have to thin out later on. This tray is now filled with 21 yogurt cups, all with plant tags. And now the next step is to go ahead and water in all of these young seedlings. I just want to put a little water from the top. This will help the soil settle into the container around the roots and eliminate some of the air pockets that might still be there. And this water gives these young plants their first boost of water. So I'll just go ahead and finish this up, and we'll move to the next step. These seedlings probably won't need water again for a couple days, and from this point forward I'll be watering from the bottom. Right now we need to get them under lights. And I want the lights to be just a few inches above these plants. So I'll go ahead and lower these lights. I really like these adjustable ratchets that enable me to raise and lower the lights So the lights will go up as the plants grow. The height of the lights above the plants will vary based on the type of light. Now, most of my lights are fluorescent bulbs, and so they're 3 or 4 inches above the plants because they don't produce much heat, but they're also not high intensity lights. If you're using something like incandescent bulbs that put off a lot of heat, you want to raise them above the lights so that they don't overheat and essentially cook the plants. And if you have higher intensity lights, even LED lights that are more powerful, you might want to have them a little higher above the plants. So now let's look at the other way that I transplant seedlings, and that's from the 72 cell tray. Most of these peppers are still a little young for transplanting, but there are a few that are starting to develop their first set of true leaves. It's just starting to grow above those initial cotyledon leaves. And so while I prefer to transplant after that first set, and even when the second set of true leaves have fully developed, this is an example of one of those situations where I have soil, I have containers, I have the plants, I have the time, so I might as well do some transplanting. The basic process is the same as before. I'll take a container, this time it's a square container, a little bit bigger, fill about half of it with soil. Now I'll take my tongue depressor and I'll get into the cell that I want to transplant and then pry out the peppers. So I'll go ahead and come in, loosen the soil around the edges a little bit, and then supporting the whole root ball, we'll pull it up and then place it into my pot. And then just like before, I'll add soil all around the edges and tamp it down to fill up any of that airspace. Now, I leave the tongue depressor in place until I filled all the way around it, and then I pull it out and firm down the potting soil just a little bit. This helps undo any extra stress that might be on the plant. As I'm moving these very young seedlings, I want to try to be sure not to squeeze the stem. If I transport this by holding onto the stem, I can damage it and kill the plant. So that's why I do most of my movement by using this as a lever and then my hand to support the root ball. And so this is ready to go. Now we can do the label and move on with some of the rest. And so again, we take our container, put some soil in it, take our tongue depressor, go down to the bottom, try to support the root ball as much as possible. And you can see there are some roots that are growing out the bottom. And so it might be a little bit early, but not really bad because we've got enough root development to support the transplant. And then we put our soil around the plant, pull up the tongue depressor, fill behind it, move all this in place, take out the tongue depressor. If I need to move the plant, I can just slide it to the side. I don't need to squeeze onto it at all. Firming, but not packing the soil. And these are done. I do treat these very young seedlings differently than I do the ones that have the true sets of leaves already established on them. You may have noticed that there were 2 plants in each of these that I just transplanted. I'm not going to even attempt to try to tease them apart and put them in individual pots. There's just not enough root development. And that's what the true leaves really identify for the plant. When they've got the first and second set of leaves, well, then you can expect that they've got a more robust root system developed. So I wanted to show you with the very young plants that you can transplant them, but using a lever and being very tender and treating them gingerly is really the best way to do it. And if you have one of these cell packs with those holes on the bottom, definitely do not poke up with your finger or a tool when they're this young. There's just not enough root development. And so you'll end up just probably pushing your finger all the way through and causing the whole thing to fall apart. For those type of cell trays, definitely wait until you have established plants with established leaves, and then their roots will hold all of that soil together. For now, I'll go ahead and move a few of these into pots, but like this one has 3 plants. Here's 2, 2, 2, 3. I'm going to go ahead and let these grow to the point that they have more leaves before I transplant them. And then at that point, I'll go ahead and tease them apart and put each of these individual plants into an individual pot. And to show you some of the process to get us to this point and answer some of the questions you might have, well, go ahead and watch one of these videos next. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.